Ed Sullivan stood in his office at CBS, holding a letter from Louis Armstrong's doctor that made his hands shake with emotion. It was March 28, 1971, and the letter contained medical information that Ed wished he had never received. Louis Armstrong Mays Satchmo, the greatest jazz musician who ever lived, was dying of heart failure and had perhaps weeks left to live. But Louis had personally called Ed that morning with a request that broke Ed's heart. He wanted to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show one final time, to say goodbye to America through the music that had been his life's work. Ed faced an impossible choice between protecting a dying legend from the strain of performance and honoring the final wish of the man who had done more to shape American music than anyone else in history. Before you hear this heartbreaking story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is how Ed Sullivan helped America's greatest musician deliver the most courageous performance of his extraordinary life. To understand the magnitude of Ed Sullivan's dilemma, you need to understand what Louis Armstrong represented to American music and culture by 1971. Louis wasn't just another jazz performer, he was the founding father of American popular music, the man who had invented the modern concept of the solo performer and influenced every musician who came after him. His gravelly voice and virtuosic trumpet playing had made him beloved worldwide, but more than that, he had broken down racial barriers through the sheer force of his talent and personality, during an era when such barriers seemed insurmountable. Louis had appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show more than any other musical performer over the years, with over 20 appearances dating back to the early 1950s. Ed had watched Louis evolve from a groundbreaking jazz artist into a beloved international ambassador for American music, but Ed had also watched Louis' health deteriorate over the past 5 years as heart disease and the physical demands of a lifetime of performance, and the constant pressure of being a public figure during the civil rights era took their toll on the 70-year-old musician. The relationship between Ed and Louis had developed into something deeper than typical host-performer dynamics. Ed genuinely loved Louis as both an artist and a human being, respecting his dignity, his courage in facing racism throughout his career, and his unwavering commitment to spreading joy through music even when the world around him was often hostile and unwelcoming. Louis has been like family to me, Ed had told his wife Sylvia during one of their many conversations about Louis' declining health. I've watched him charm presidents and paupers, break down prejudice with nothing but music and that incredible smile. He's performed for audiences who wouldn't let him eat in their restaurants or stay in their hotels, and he did it with grace and dignity that put the rest of us to shame. But I've also seen him getting weaker, struggling more with each performance. I'm worried that his love of performing is going to kill him. The March 28, 1971 phone call had come at 6 a.m., waking Ed from sleep with Louis' familiar gravelly voice on the other end of the line. Even through the telephone, Ed could hear the labored breathing that indicated how much Louis' heart condition had worsened since their last conversation. "Pops," Louis said, using his affectionate nickname for Ed, "I need to ask you for something important, and I want you to hear me out before you say no. I know my health ain't good, and I know you probably heard from the doctors about my situation. But I got one more thing I need to do before I can rest." Ed had felt his stomach drop, knowing that Louis was about to ask for something that could literally cost him his life. But he also knew that refusing Louis' request would go against everything their friendship had meant over the years. "I want to come on your show one more time," Louis continued, his voice carrying both determination and the weariness of a man who knew he was running out of time. "I want to sing Hello Dolly, and What a Wonderful World for America. I want to say goodbye the right way, through music, not in some hospital bed where nobody can hear me. I want people to remember me making them happy, not as some sick old male fading away." Ed had been silent for a long moment, struggling with the knowledge that granting Louis' request might accelerate his death, while refusing it would deny America's greatest musician the farewell he deserved and needed. "Louis, your doctor sent me a letter about your condition," Ed said gently, trying to balance honesty with compassion. "He says performing could be extremely dangerous for your heart. The physical exertion, the emotional stress, the travel fees concerned that it could trigger another heart attack. Are you sure you want to take that risk?" Louis' laugh was weak but still carried the joy that had made him famous worldwide. "Pops, I've been taking risks my whole life. I risked everything when I left New Orleans to play music in Chicago with nobody but my horn and my dreams. I risked everything when I became a solo performer instead of staying safe in a band. I risked everything every time I played in the South during segregation, never knowing if some racist was going to hurt me for entertaining white folks. One more risk to say goodbye to the people who loved my music. That's a risk worth taking. I'd rather die on your stage playing music than waste away in a hospital bed." Ed had agreed to the performance, but with extensive conditions designed to minimize the strain on Louis' failing heart. The appearance would be limited to 2 songs, with minimal staging and a comfortable chair available for Louis if he needed to rest between numbers. Ed also arranged for a cardiac specialist to be present in the studio, with emergency medical equipment standing by, and he personally called Louis' wife Lucille to ensure she supported Louis' decision and to discuss the risks involved. "Louis has made his choice," Lucille had told Ed during their emotional conversation. "I can't stop him from being who he is, even if it scares me to death. If he's going to leave us, he wants to leave playing music, bringing joy to people, being the Louis Armstrong the world fell in love with. I understand that, and I'll support him, even though it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do." The April 11th, 1971 taping date arrived with unusual secrecy surrounding Louis' appearance. Ed had made the difficult decision not to publicize the fact that this would be Louis' final performance, wanting to avoid turning the show into a death watch, while still giving Louis the dignified platform he desired. Only essential production staff knew about Louis' condition, and Ed had asked them to treat this taping with the special care and reverence it deserved. When Louis arrived at CBS Studio 50 that afternoon, Ed was shocked by his physical condition despite being prepared by the doctor's reports. The robust, energetic performer Ed had known for 20 years had been replaced by a frail man who needed assistance walking and was clearly struggling to breathe even with minimal exertion. But Louis' eyes still sparkled with the joy and mischief that had made him beloved worldwide, and his smile retained the warmth that had charmed audiences for 5 decades. "Don't look so worried, Pops," Louis told Ed as he was carefully helped to his dressing room. "I may be dying, but I ain't dead yet, and as long as I can still blow this horn and sing these songs, I'm going to keep doing what God put me on earth to do. Music has been my life. It's only right that it should be with me at the end." During the brief rehearsal, it became painfully clear that Louis' physical limitations were severe. His trumpet playing, while still recognizable and emotionally powerful, lacked the technical precision and effortless power that had defined his career. His voice was weaker, requiring more frequent rests, and he needed to sit down between songs to catch his breath. But there was something in his performance that transcended technical perfection, an emotional depth and authenticity that came from a man who knew he was singing his last songs and wanted to make every note count. "This is going to be one of the most important performances in television history," Ed told his production staff before the taping began. "We're witnessing a master artist's farewell, and our job is to capture it with the dignity and respect it deserves." When the cameras began rolling, Louis Armstrong summoned reserves of strength that seemed to come from pure willpower and love of music. He performed "Hello Dolly," the song that had given him his biggest commercial hit in the 1960s, with a joy and energy that belied his physical condition. His trumpet playing was limited, but his vocal performance carried decades of experience and emotion. Ed watched from the wings, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed this musical giant giving everything he had left to entertain the American people one final time. The studio audience seemed to sense they were witnessing something historic, responding with unusual quiet attention rather than their typical enthusiastic applause. For his second song, Louis chose "What a Wonderful World," the gentle ballad that had become his signature song in later years. As he sang about trees of green and skies of blue, his voice carried a poignant awareness of a man who was saying goodbye to the wonderful world he was about to leave behind. The performance was heartbreaking and beautiful, a master class in how an artist can use their final moment in the spotlight to remind people of what really matters in life. Louis sang about the beauty of the world with the perspective of someone who had seen both its worst cruelties and its greatest joys. When Louis finished "What a Wonderful World," the studio audience was completely silent for several seconds before erupting in applause that seemed to go on forever. Ed walked onto the stage, struggling to maintain his professional composure while knowing he was participating in a farewell that would never be repeated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ed said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have just witnessed a performance by the greatest musician America has ever produced. Louis Armstrong has given us more than music. He's given us joy, hope, and a reminder of what's possible when talent meets determination and love." Louis stood slowly, aided by Ed, and took a bow that required tremendous effort, but his smile was radiant, the same expression of pure joy that had captivated audiences for 50 years. After the cameras stopped rolling, Louis sat heavily in the chair that had been provided for him, clearly exhausted by the performance but also visibly satisfied that he had accomplished what he set out to do. "Thank you, Pops," Louis said to Ed as the studio crew packed up their equipment. "That's how I wanted to say goodbye. Making music, bringing joy, reminding people that this world is beautiful even when it's hard." Ed knelt beside Louis' chair, taking his hand in a gesture of friendship and respect that transcended their professional relationship. "Louis, you didn't just say goodbye tonight," Ed said. "You reminded America why we fell in love with you in the first place. You reminded us what music can do when it comes from the heart." Louis Armstrong died 3 months later, on July 6, 1971, at his home in Queens, New York. His final Ed Sullivan Show performance became one of the most cherished pieces of footage in television history, a document of artistic courage and professional dedication that inspired musicians and performers for generations. The show aired 2 weeks after Louis' death, becoming both a celebration of his life and a national farewell to one of America's greatest cultural ambassadors. Ed's introduction to the segment was one of the most emotional moments of his career, as he struggled to find words adequate to honor a man who had meant so much to American music and culture. "Louis Armstrong asked me to help him say goodbye to America," Ed told the television audience. "What you're about to see is not just a performance, it's a love letter from a dying man to the country and the people who embraced his music and gave meaning to his life." The response to Louis' final performance was overwhelming. CBS received thousands of letters from viewers who had been moved by Louis' courage and grace in the face of death. Musicians from every genre praised Louis' final appearance as an example of artistic integrity and professional dedication that set a standard for how performers should approach their craft. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Louis' fellow musicians, who understood the significance of what he had accomplished in those final moments on stage. Miles Davis, who had famously been critical of Louis' later commercial success, said of the final Sullivan performance, "Louis reminded us all why we started playing music in the first place. Not for fame or money, but for the joy of sharing something beautiful with people who need to hear it." Ed Sullivan later described Louis' final appearance as the most meaningful performance in the history of his show, not because of its technical perfection, but because of its demonstration of what art could accomplish when approached with love, courage, and complete dedication. "Louis Armstrong taught me something about courage that night," Ed reflected years later. "He showed me that sometimes the most important thing an artist can do is continue creating beauty even when they know it might cost them everything." His final performance wasn't about entertaining people. It was about reminding them that life is precious and that music can help us appreciate the wonderful world we're privileged to live in. The legacy of Louis Armstrong's final Ed Sullivan Show appearance extends far beyond entertainment history. It stands as a testament to the power of art to transcend physical limitations and as an example of how great artists can use their final moments to leave something meaningful for future generations. If this story of courage and artistic dedication moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell us, how do you want to be remembered when your time comes? Sometimes the most important thing we can do is use our final moments to remind people of what makes life worth living.